Are you a new real estate investor or a real estate agent wanting to work with more investors, but you're not sure how to analyze a deal? In this video, I want to talk to you about how to analyze a fix and flip property so that you can go get that next deal or help a client get their next deal. In this video, I want to talk to you about how to analyze an investment property that you plan on renovating and flipping. Before we get going, it's important to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all analysis for every property. It all depends on the goals of the investor and the exit strategy for the specific property that you're analyzing. This is just a high-level breakdown of the formulas and the math that I do to analyze an investment property. So if you're an experienced investor already, maybe you already know some of this stuff, but if you're new or if you're a real estate agent wanting to get into investing, hopefully you find some value in some of this. In this particular video, I want to talk to you about how to analyze an investment property that you plan on renovating and selling, also known as a fix and flip strategy. We're not going to cover how to prospect or find the deals in this video, more so how to do the math and analyze a property that you've already identified. The four pieces to the puzzle that you're going to need is going to be your ARV of the property, or the after repair value, the renovation cost to renovate the property, the quiet cost associated with the transaction, and then your minimum profit that we want to factor in. Like any investment property, the first thing you want to find out is what is the ARV? What is the after repair value of the home? This is going to be the max amount that the home could be worth after a renovation. You determine this by running comps on the property and pretending that the renovations you're going to do are already done. So you're basically going to see what is the maximum value that you can get out of this particular property. Banks also call this a future value appraisal. When working with a fix and flip property, determining the ARV might be the most important part because it's determining what that end buyer will potentially buy your property for. So if you don't do this part right, you might overpay for a property or overbuild a property, and now you're upside down and you can't get anyone to buy it for what you need to sell it for. I see investors and wholesalers all the time try to fudge the numbers or get skinny on some costs just to make a deal look better on paper, but at the end of the deal, they end up spending too much money or being upside down on the value. When determining the ARV of a fix and flip property, you really want to be confident in your comps that you're using. You don't want to go too far back in time because remember, you might have a 2, 3, 4, 5 month project, so by the time your job's done, those comps might be outdated. You also want to make sure you find comps from the exact neighborhood. I see too many people go too far away from the property to find comps that they think supports their value, when in reality, there's a lot of good comps that just don't support the deal. And they overlook those because they're trying to force the deal. Once you think you have a good idea of what the ARV can be, then you can start to work on what the renovation costs can be to get it to that standard of value. And that's when we figure out the second piece of the puzzle, which is what is our renovation cost going to be? Now, the best way to do this is to have tons of experience and knowledge and know how labor and materials fluctuate over time. But if you don't have a ton of experience or a ton of connections in the real estate or the construction industry, I recommend you finding a good team to work with. Find a good contractor or a good real estate investor that you can partner with to help you determine these costs. In the meantime, you can use the cost per square foot rule of thumb to determine renovation costs on a project. Now, just keep in mind, this rule of thumb is constantly changing. So from month to month or year to year, it might not apply. But here in 2023, what I've been using is approximately $20 to $25 per square foot renovation costs for properties that just need cosmetic repairs only. This is going to be properties that just need new flooring, new paint, new countertops, new light fixtures, plumbing fixtures, just the aesthetics and cosmetics only. If you're doing a light remodel, you can typically get away with about $20 to $25 per square foot in renovation cost. So if you have a 1,500 square foot house, about $30,000 to $37,000 is going to get your cosmetic repairs done. If the property is needing a larger remodel, maybe you're taking out walls or doing a complete gut, or maybe the foundation or a roof or electric, heating and air, or the plumbing needs repairs. On some of those bigger projects, you're going to want to calculate about $35 to $40 per square foot in renovation costs. You're bringing in a lot more technical trades, the electricians, the plumbers. They charge more than the typical labor would for just doing tile or paint or flooring. A couple things to keep in mind with the cost per square foot approach is it doesn't really scale down. So if you go down below 1,200 feet house, maybe you have a 1,000 square foot house or 900 square foot house, or even 1,100 or 1,200 square foot house, costs don't really scale down below that. You're gonna have certain fixed costs. Every bathroom is gonna be about $3,000 or $4,000. Regardless of how big or small the house is, the bathroom is fixed. Kitchens are going to be fixed. So if you're flipping a house that might be smaller than 1,200 square feet, you might have to apply more dollars per foot to that renovation because those costs don't scale down very much. The other thing is be mindful of the area that you're flipping the house in. Maybe it's a high-end neighborhood and it's going to require marble and all kinds of extra finishes to get the house sold for the right value. Your price per square foot is going to be a little higher on those. If it's in a rental neighborhood, you might be able to get away with the lower end of the price per square foot because you don't have to put as nice of finishes in. I want to put another disclaimer out there. I don't use this price per square foot rule to actually purchase the property. I use this in my analysis and even to make an offer, but I always try to walk through the property or have my contractor walk through the property before we actually close on a deal. Unless you are a seasoned veteran with tons of experience and capital, it can be very risky to buy stuff just on these rules of thumb. Okay, now that you have an ARV and a renovation cost, now we need to calculate the third piece of the puzzle, which is the quiet costs associated with the transaction. This is the most commonly missed step for most new investors. They don't calculate these costs in, and it ends up getting them in trouble at the end of the deal. Quiet costs are going to be the costs associated with acquiring the property, holding the property while you do the renovation, and then selling the property. Your cost to acquire might be appraisal fees or title fees or lender fees. Your holding cost is going to be your debt service, your insurance, your utilities. And then your selling cost is going to be your real estate commissions, your title costs, other costs for repairs or other things associated with the transaction. For your acquisition costs, get with your local lenders and your title companies that you plan on working with and figuring out what kind of fees they charge to acquire a property. The banks and title companies that I typically work with usually charge around $2,500 to acquire. Those are the fees associated with purchasing a property. Holding costs can vary greatly between deals, so you really need to determine those specific to each deal. But let's just say for this video that our typical holding costs between debt service, insurance, utilities for a couple months is going to be about $1,500. Lastly, the selling costs. And the biggest piece of this is going to be the real estate fee that you have to pay when you go to sell the property. So the rule of thumb that I use is figure out what the commission is you're going to have to pay and then tack on 1% for your other closing costs. So let's say you have a deal with a real estate agent and they will list your property for 4.5% commission. Just tack on 1% to that and your selling costs will be approximately 5.5% of the ARV. Assuming we have an ARV of about $200,000, that gives us $15,000 in selling costs that we're going to incur just for doing this transaction. Push all those together and that makes up your quiet costs for the whole deal. So you can see if an investor doesn't account for that, it can really eat up most or all of the profit really, really quickly. And the last piece of the puzzle is you need to figure out what your minimum profit is. This is the minimum profit that you're willing to receive to take on the risk and the time of buying, renovating, and selling this property. Each person needs to figure out their own minimum profit, but let's, for this example, say that a minimum profit we want is $25,000. Something to keep in mind when you're determining your minimum profit is that there's always going to be overages. These are just estimates. So I see a lot of investors go into a deal and they say, I'm okay only making $5,000 or $10,000, and that's great if everything goes perfect, but there's always overages, there's always delays. So that $10,000 profit you have built in could get eaten up with one delay or one overage. So think of this minimum profit as profit, but also think of it as your cushion to make sure you're not losing any money. So you don't want to go into it and say, I'm okay making $1,000 because that's going to get eaten up in overages really fast. Okay, so now that we have all the pieces of the puzzle, let's talk about the actual formula to analyze a deal. In this example, let's say we have a property with an ARV of approximately $225,000. Let's also assume it's an 1,800 square foot house that needs basic cosmetic remodel. So that's approximately $45,000 in renovation costs. So we're going to subtract that from the $225,000 ARV. Then we're going to say there's $16,000 in quiet costs. That's approximately $2,500 for acquisition costs, approximately $1,500 for holding costs, and approximately $12,000 for selling costs. So we subtract that off as well. And then we're going to subtract off our minimum profit, which is another $25,000. So if we have a property with an ARV of $225,000, we subtract off $45,000 for the renovation, $16,000 for the quiet costs, and $25,000 for the minimum profit. That leaves us with $139,000 that we can max offer on this property. So this is where it gets tricky because maybe the property is listed at $150,000 or $200,000. That's where you need to determine, is it worth making the offer? How low can you get that seller? And if there's actually a deal here to be done. I can't tell you how many properties I've analyzed that I just couldn't get a deal done because it was listed for too expensive or the renovations were too much and I couldn't give them the price they wanted. It's so important to approach it from this angle. Start with the ARV and work your way down to a max price. Because if you start with a list price and work your way up to an ARV, I promise you're gonna start fudging numbers, you're gonna start cutting costs, so that you can make that deal work, and you're going to end up getting yourself in trouble. I've seen people start with a list price and then come up with their quiet costs and come up with a renovation and then kind of fudge an ARV, and then they cut a couple costs here and they kind of squeeze it and they think they can get it done here, and all it does is get them in trouble and get over leveraged on a house, and they can't sell it for what they have in it. Don't put yourself in a situation where you made the margins too thin just to make a deal work and now you're in financial trouble. So that's really it, guys. I wanted to show you what factors you needed to do the analysis and then the math behind the analysis so that you know what offer you can make on a property and still make money. Now that you have the formula, you can start prospecting deals, analyzing deals, so that when a good one comes across your desk, you can identify it and you can jump on it quickly. I hope you found this video valuable. If you have any questions at all, leave a comment, reach out. I would love to talk about real estate investing with you. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.